Welcome back to Remote Sales Live. I'm Jonathan Fisher, your host. Glad to have you with us today. One of the most important ways to grow any business, services, or technology company is through channel partners. Whether through individual consultants or enterprise initiatives, it's a fantastic way to scale quickly and establish a stable channel of business for the long term. Yet nearly half of all SaaS companies have no established channel partner program of any kind. What's the holdup? And what does it take to fill that gap if that's your company? Well, to help us dive into that important topic today is our very own Tanyette Colon. With an incredibly diverse background, which includes hosting a sports radio show in Chicago, sales and business development roles for several prominent companies, and consulting with international governments, Tanyette is today an accomplished author, business consultant, advisory board member, and she's the founder of the tech company InFUUSE, a SaaS communications platform. And best of all, from our point of view, she's the head of channel partnerships here at Overpass. Tanyette, what a great pleasure to have you here on the show with us today.
It's so fun to be on this side of the screen. I'm usually attending. So yeah, I'm a little bit nervous, I won't lie.
That's because you're passionate about it. We're going to have a great time together today. And a quick reminder to our audience, hey, we're going to have our live Q&A at the end of the show. Don't forget that. This is a live program, so go right ahead and start sending your questions in via chat. We'll get you some live answers right here, right now with our guest at the end of the show. So, Tanyette, let's lead off with what you do in your role as head of channel partnerships or partner ecosystems, as you like to say it, here at Overpass.
Yeah, channel partnerships and that's the first thing I learned when I started delving into the world of partnerships. There's so much like the tech world, right? There's so many acronyms, so many different titles, your head swirling as to what is what by the end of it, because then there's like interpretation that is attached to it. But my whole position here with Overpass is to create a partner ecosystem that's thriving, both for the partners that are within it, as well as our customers. So that's really the center point of everything. And when people ask, well, what is an ecosystem? I wrote about this yesterday on LinkedIn. The best example of an ecosystem is nature, right? It's diverse, it's complex, but when all points connect, everyone's thriving within that ecosystem. So there is no true separation. So you can shift that to business, right, as an analogy, that the whole idea behind any ecosystem that you're building should be for the good of all parts involved. So yeah, that's my definition of an ecosystem. Yeah.
I love that. That's really good stuff. And I want to dive deeper into that. But I think your background is also worth mentioning just a little bit. You have an interesting, and as I mentioned in the intro, rather diverse background. There's some experiences that you had in your previous work in consulting that have, I think you've shared with me, have shaped your philosophy of a channel partner ecosystem. Could you tell us a little about one story in particular was really of interest to me? You worked with the Norwegian government. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and that was less about consulting. I'm a very passion-driven individual. So outside of my business life, things that I care about, whether that's mental health, diversity and inclusion, ability based on personal experiences, with fracking and energy development that was happening in the US. I have family in Norway, so I understood culturally what they care about, and nature's a cornerstone of a lot. They always take nature in mind, even when they're building things. They tend to be sustainable, just, it's ingrained in them. And so what I've learned through that experience was the power, and this will parlay into the things we're going to be talking about later, because the missing pieces when you're building any form of ecosystem is this trust and the power of human to human dialogue and heart-centered conversation. So I had done a lot of work with the Norwegian government prior to 2017. And why Norway? People are probably asking. Norway has the wealthiest sovereign fund in the entire world. And what that means is that they are invested in every major company in the world. So when they divest in something, you feel the vibrations across the globe. So back in 2017, early 2017, there was something called the Dakota Access Pipeline. It was known as DAPL, Waters Life. I don't know if anyone was paying attention to the news, but it was an international story. And it was predominantly because there was a pipeline that would be carrying crude oil through indigenous land. And why this was stark is, in the financial world, there's something called the equator principles where they're supposed to look at risk, especially when it comes to indigenous land, what the impact would be. A lot of that was bypassed. And second, we had international funds coming into the US and basically subsidizing eminent domain on indigenous lands. So Norway's fund was heavily invested in it. By early 2017, it was almost right before the decision that the US government was going to make on moving forward with that pipeline. And it was going through some delicate water supplies. And so what I did was I teamed up with an indigenous women's nonprofit organization. Again, this is not something I consult in. This was my passion point and having known Norway's philosophy on things. And then I took my skill set of being a consultant and in sales, et cetera. And I started cold calling meetings for this indigenous divestment of women coalition that was going to come into Norway quietly, like a little A team, and have conversations with the people that I was able to set up meetings with. So I was able, in a short period of time of 3 weeks or less, schedule meetings with parliament members, the Wealth Fund Committee, some of the Sami representatives, which is the indigenous group in Norway. One of my contacts at Greenpeace was able to get a lot of media to cover the story. And the biggest coup was being able to get the gentleman who actually manages the Wealth Fund in the meeting, because prior to that, he had only met with, the fund is managed through Norges Bank, just like Norway Bank. And prior to that, he had only been meeting with Elon Musk, because Elon Musk comes here a lot to speak with, with a lot of different people when it comes to sustainability. And so I cold called him, and it had been unheard of that he would ever sit in a meeting. But this is where that human to human and really using your skill set for social impact, which we'll talk about that even in a business perspective for doing ecosystems. So he sat in the meeting, and the end result was when they started hearing about what was happening, because it became a police state because the indigenous, the people who live there started to quietly and peacefully protest, but we had military tanks in front of our own people. And so when they started hearing those stories, I can tell you it was like a scene out of a movie. There was not a dry eye. He was the first one crying in that room. And then I also had a meeting with their biggest bank, which is, it's called DNB, but it's like saying the Citibank of Scandinavia. And my friend actually had done the financial modeling for that whole project. But what they missed was they thought because it was the US that we had done our due diligence, and Citibank was doing that round. Anyway, to make a long story short, it showed the power of what a small group of people can do, because we didn't have millions of dollars to go on some PR kind of run. We were able to get in front of these people through simple heart-to-heart cold call, because there was no other way to do it. They came into the meetings, and in 2019, the fund actually pulled out of any oil and gas infrastructure across the globe, and they started pulling out of infrastructure, actual like oil and gas plays in different parts of the globe. So there was like a huge impact on that. And then for the women delegation, because these were women that were doctors, attorneys, you name it, they were well versed. They ended up going on an international tour to talk to other banks about the Equator Principle and really enforcing it moving forward when it comes to indigenous land. So I use this as an example to say this looked like an impossible task, right? You're 5 women going against the Goliath, which is the energy industry. But because we were able to find this spot in Norway that controls so much of that conversation with their investments. So when they pull out of something, it gets the world's attention. And we were able to help, shift that conversation. There's a compounding effect to that. So imagine if we could use that same formula in how we build business moving forward. It's a way more exciting way, an expansive way to build business. And that's where business is shifting, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really great story, and I love the fact that you aimed higher than most people would have even had the nerve to aim, and you got through. And it's amazing that human connection, the power of that. Well, there is obviously a lot of opportunity to grow a company through channel partnerships, and some of the lessons you learned there are definitely going to apply. Let's set the table a little bit. What are companies that do not have a really well-designed channel partner ecosystem in place missing out on, and why?
Well, we have to go back to where the mindset has been the last 20 years. which has been, there's been a lot of automation on the marketing side in the last 10. And then if you go 10 before that, there was a lot of digitization happening in the sales side of it, right? So all of a sudden, data became the king. People wouldn't make a decision or walk around the corner without making sure that the data lined up for that decision to be made. It did empower going direct, right? But it also created a transactional effect where all of a sudden partnerships didn't really mean much at that point, right? Because you could get it, you were empowered to go direct to a consumer. What's happening now, and I believe COVID accelerated this a bit, is that people are fatigued out with automation. It's dehumanized the process. There is no value built in that. And we're now living in a world where trust is of value, because just look at what's happening in the world's affair. Most people don't trust the government. They don't trust their neighbor. There's a deficiency of trust. So when you can build something that is built on give first and trust, all of a sudden you can remove the noise of automation. And that's truly where the value is. What happens though is that for a founder most founders can't comprehend this, because one is it's not as predictable in the short run. Over time, you can start like seeing what's working, what's not, but it's not as predictable as direct would be. And also it's just a transactional mindset, because there's some level of surrender that has to happen to say, I'm willing to give first. I'm truly willing to serve our customers and partners equally. So, there's a little bit of a ramp time with that. But again, if you look at it from a bigger perspective, it could be very expansive. The best example of it was back in the 80s. And this is in the Partner Hacker Handbook. And there's also a book called Partnering with Microsoft, because Microsoft has done it really, really well. And 95% of their revenue comes from partnerships. And a lot of that just has to do with they created value back in that whole PC gold rush back in the 80s. They created a value system around the product, right? They became the king and queen of bundling products that would help their customers, right? So that's the best example. And then while all this automation and sales automation started taking place, the newer examples are HubSpot and Salesforce during the time and they were part of that, right? They were part of making it easier to get to the analytics, et cetera. They started taking the Microsoft quietly model and creating, partners around their product, which is why they're sitting in a better place now. So yeah.
Yeah, they want the opposite of Apple. So you can certainly take the opposite tack, but I guess you better be a genius designer and be able to build a very loyal base. But even Apple to this day is somewhat niched in certain verticals where they serve better than others. Meanwhile, the other platforms did take over far more market share. So I think it's a really good case in point. So the opportunity is huge there, but I'd like to dig a little bit deeper. You mentioned about how this isn't a transactional affair when it comes to building channel partnerships. Every relationship is kind of its own thing in a way, and yet we talk so much about efficiency, having it down to process, right? Process improvement, and these are smart things to be focused on. Is there kind of is it sharing between worlds there? Do you think that's a big part of it? Is there sort of an ownership question in the mind or the heart of a founder that may hold them back? Dig a little deeper. Why aren't if over almost half of SaaS companies don't have partnerships? They all know how Microsoft grew. You can't get into tech and not know Microsoft's story, right? Why aren't they doing it?
Well, just think about funding them. The minute they get any form of funding coming, they need to be able to show value ASAP, right? As soon as that check hits their bank account, they need to be able to show. So it goes back to this old mindset of transactional. Let me get, 20 sales rep. Let me grind it out. Let me automate it. Let me control this outcome, where partnerships is a longer tail play, one that pays off in dividends if you do it really, really well. But if you have an investor saying, I need to see results now, partnerships is not going to be the play you bring out initially to them. It should be part of it from the get-go, but most of them are running to the traditional model.
Yeah.
So there's
pressure from leadership. Pressure from leadership or ownership, the shareholders. Yeah. So there's one of the things that can hold people back. You got to maybe sell the concept up the chain a little bit. Well, maybe part of making that sale is to have the proof of a very effective model. So let's quickly segue then. I mean, Tanyette, you've done some great work inside of Overpass, and it's a burgeoning initiative. It does have the full support of leadership. Can you tell us how you've been building that? Give us your principles of starting a channel partner ecosystem from scratch.
Good question. And I will say that I can only speak to it as from the perspective of building it from scratch. And we're still on the journey because we're only 6 months in. One of the first things I did, and this is going to be something that people are like, yes, we know that, purpose, ethos, etc. But I did because I knew I needed my North Star, knowing that there's a lot of surrender that has to happen the first few months. And I do come from a sales background. I mean, I built a 7-figure book of business on my own, with a lot of this partnership mindset when I was doing it unknowingly back then. But the first thing you have to do, and this is critical, is create ethos. The ethos is basically going to be the culture and the vibe of what the ecosystem represents. The reason why that's important is because that's going to magnetize in your partners. And it's also going to be your guiding star when something doesn't feel like a partner doesn't feel in alignment with the vision of what you're building in that ecosystem, then you can walk away, right? Because it's not a match. So it's a good guidepost to be able to say. And in our case, we wanted to partner up with partners that were equally as passionate to serve our clients the way we are, because we go out of our way to make sure that clients are taken care of. They're receiving love throughout the whole journey. So that was important to us to make sure that they were equally lined up for that, and as well as equally as committed as we are to helping our customers grow. So that was the ethos. And then I went into the social impact because, of course, with my experience in Norway and other things I'm passionate about, I've seen what is possible when there is conviction. And I know that everything we do as humans, I don't care if you're just a salesperson, when you can help anybody, it could be just a local clerk at a store, any engagement has an impact, especially when you're in business climate that we're in today. So the social impact for us, I wanted to be clear on what is that? If we can help every single business that comes to Overpass to grow, to get there faster, what does that mean to the communities they serve? Well, it creates circular economy, right? So now we start creating a foundational solution to having more communities thrive because more businesses are thriving. A very simple way to look at it. But again, when you can look at it from that perspective, it becomes more expansive. You're working towards something bigger than just hitting some number. And then in the case of contractors, I mean, we're creating a freedom there for a contractor to be able to work from anywhere in the world, create more balance, get to choose who they get to share their magic with. And I talked about this at one of our partner webinars, even from a social impact of where you're sourcing from. There's parts and regions in the world that just don't have the same job opportunities. Now, all of a sudden, by sourcing from there, there's an impact. We're creating opportunities for people to thrive there. So I think it's looking at, company culture, but that also has to exist in every part of your company. And it's not something, I say this all the time, it's not something you can fake. You really need to be all in on this. And when you can do that, then partners are more excited to team up with you because they know it's not transactional. At that point, you're in it for the greater good. And we all know when an ecosystem is thriving, all parts are thriving. So it's not like one is giving more than the other. By default, it all clicks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, do you profile that out in a very intentional way? I mean, is this something that should be? I mean, this sounds like it's part of the process, right? The same way you build like an ideal client profile for your company overall, you build sort of an ideal partner profile. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
You do, but then you get off of it being so transactional, and you go to heart, and you have to tell yourself, "Am I unwavering on this? Like, am I in on it? Am I going to embody it?" Because then when you're speaking with someone about it, the trust is going to start to be there because they can feel your passion, and passion is, contagious. So it's no longer about selling anything. It's no longer about, hey, I know if we team up, we can grow our revenue together. It's when we team up, we can co-create magic that all of us will be thriving on. Yes, revenue will be there by default because you're going in there with a greater purpose.
Yeah, that's great. So in that spirit of it not being transactional, what are some of the additional philosophical things that need to be kept in mind going into this? I think I've heard you talk about sort of having this give first mindset. Is that part of this?
Yes, because and Jared Fuller, who wrote that recent partner hacker handbook, he coined the phrase that trust is the new data, right? Because data was the king for so long. Now trust is the queen. Give first is that. So you really want to go into it, not saying I give you this and keeping score. It needs to be like, and the CEO of HubSpot, they always use the flywheel. So basically what you're doing is you're taking your customer and then you're taking your partners in the middle as equal parts, and then you're creating value systems around them. So by giving first, you're saying, okay, based on where we are on this journey at the beginning, it's that wish list, right? Because until you go, I call it go out into the wild and see what the market gives back to you. You could say, okay, what are things based on the resources we have today that we can create some small wins for our customers? And that could be like, hey, they can be a guest on Evolve Sales Live because that's something that we have. Okay, you can't overpromise something that you can't. Obviously, you don't have the resources for. What I did was, and I felt was very important, going back to my ethos with empowering the business, was what if we could create, and this wasn't anything new, companies do this, a partner solution exchange that would be the heartbeat of everything that we do after that. So that was something that was tangible for the partner. But then for customers, we didn't want to degrade it and say, oh, it's only a deals marketplace because they've been there and they've done that. We wanted to, what we did was, I was very methodical about vetting out who is going to be there. Again, the guiding post being the ethos, so that when our customers go in there who are already overwhelmed, they don't have to worry about vetting out the next LinkedIn automation company, the next, sales sequence company. I meet with all of these companies more than once. I get to learn our partners. I get to learn their business, and then from there they confidently go in. And I know that any partner that uses them, I'm not worried about whether or not they're going to deliver at our level. So
that's fantastic. And it's adding so much more value to the Overpass client because now they have all these additional resources that they're beck and call just from the one relationship with us. That's fantastic.
Well, that's the whole idea, is to make it thriving for them. They're going to, you almost have to be as methodical and put yourself to walk a mile or two in your customer's shoes. Again, this is not, I don't think anything I'm talking about today is going to be like, it's almost like a no-brainer, but it's easy to bypass it because, again, when you go back to the original transactional mindset, every founder's ready to automate something that we don't even know what we're automating into. And more than likely, you should only be automating part of the process. The communication should still stay human. So I utilize that as the first point of really building a foundation for our program. And partners love it as well because they know the goal is not to have 50 of them in there, because then that defeats the 50. By 50, I mean like 50 marketing agencies, because then that confuses our customers. And the goal is to take that pain away for our customers to be able to go in there and say, okay, I need A, B, C. They go in and they can engage with our partners. And since then, we've added like 5 or 6 more additional, like what we call give first wins, which would be our head of growth invited us a part of education for the team. So now team gets to learn more about our partners and what they do. We're going to be launching our Fireside Chat series to have a more intimate conversation with partners. So it's just over time, it starts to develop, again, in alignment with what you initially create. That's why I'm so big on that whole ethos and social impact, because it starts layering in the rest of the foundation.
Well, and I've heard you talk about even, not being afraid to kind of go out into the wild in this phase of things, finding ideal partners. Tell us more about that.
So that's where you go out, and I use the word play. So the whole thing when you're building something, you cannot, the minute, and it's the same startup, because essentially I'm building a startup in Overpass, like this, building out any kind of partnership division from scratch is like a mini startup in a startup. Basically, you cannot get too attached to outcomes, right? So you can go in and have this preconceived, I think without a doubt that this is our ideal partner profile. You can put a list together, but you can't get attached that it has to be that way. You have to allow the market to give it back to you, right? So you may have gone in thinking it's only going to be an affiliate program and people are going to be sending out links to ethers, right? And then you go out into the wild, and the wild is, into real life, and real life partners are showing you, hey, we really need it to be more bespoke, but the compounding effect over time to be more grand that way. And so that's what I mean. Like, you have to almost take a few weeks to go in that discovery phase and have what you think where the market is, and then basically validate that for you. And then you start formulating additional from there.
And over time, you can be a little more systematic in your approach, I imagine, but while leaving that flexibility to be creative and be open along the way. Does that sound right?
100%.
So, Tanyette, if we can kind of break down what you said, this is great stuff. Could you take about 60 to 80 seconds and maybe break that down into some action items? And I know in some ways it kind of be a recap because you've been kind of sharing some things I could definitely see myself going out and taking action on. But in terms of some bullet points, how could our listeners begin to implement what you've been talking about here?
So once they go through the process of getting clear on why they're building it in the first place and what kind of ecosystem they want to build, the first place to go on having those conversations would either be A, your existing client base. And if that's not the case, it would be B, your LinkedIn contacts, because more than likely you probably have 10, 20, 30 potential conversations there that could be your next partner. If you've done your due diligence on feeling the pain for your customer, you'll be able to get more dialed in those initial conversations with those potential new partners. And then I wouldn't automate in these early stages. Later on, you should. Of course, process has to be there over time to be able to scale any program, but we throw scale around too quickly. And what happens is if you over automate in an early stage, or you get desperate to scale something before it has a chance to fully evolve, you stifle it. So I would say go out and have real conversations. Don't worry about automating every single thing, and don't get caught up in transactional numbers, because I would rather have an ecosystem of 100 really dialed in partners than 1,000 for which 80% of them are doing nothing. By nothing, I mean they're not engaged. They don't care about your mission. They're not dialed in, and at that point, it defeats the purpose of having one in the first place.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Tanyette, really a great conversation, and I think there's a lot of greater depth that we could go into on this. How can our listeners take even further steps? You have an event upcoming that people could attend. Tell us about that.
So this was part of our vision from like day one, and now it's the time that we're executing it, which was to have more of a fireside chat series, which allows our partners to come in and talk about topics they're passionate about. For this first one, and we're going to be talking about different growth topics, but this first one, it made sense to do ecosystem. So we have our contact from HubSpot for startups, who's all about give first. He's going to be on there. Then we're going to have one of the team members from Partner Hacker, because they're one of the lead voices right now in how partnerships are shifting in what I call the modern day 20s, because this next decade will be the decade of partnerships. And then we have Maxine, who's one of our partners as well from My Brain, who created this incredible like knowledge marketplace. She will be there as well. So the whole idea is we want to give actionable insights, but we also want to invite people to look at business differently through the power of storytelling.
Love it. So, and what are you calling this event again?
It's our fireside chat series.
Fireside chat series. I love it. If there's a link you can provide me in the chat here as we're in a Q&A, I'll go ahead and post that up here in our notes as well for everybody. Well, excellent. Well, yeah, I love it. I'm gonna mention our fantastic sponsor of the show now, which can you guess? It's Overpass.com. Hey, do you need to build a team of remote sales professionals fast? As the leading solution for hiring pre-vetted talent, Overpass has you covered. With thousands of qualified candidates to choose from, the Overpass platform allows you to filter by industry and experience, interview and onboard new hires in as little as 2 days. Create your free account today at Overpass.com. So let's flip over into our Q&A now, if we could. And I did have a pretty good number of comments coming in from our awesome live audience here. I'm going to pick one here. Andrew Ellenberg, as always, asked a fantastic question here. He'd like to get a little deeper. Is it more about the partner persona, per se, or the solution that integrates with Overpass?
It's more about, if you're looking at the partner and the customer, it's more about solving their pain points.
Okay.
That's that's really it, right? So when you're looking at your partner persona, first and foremost, you need to look at your customers and where they may be feeling pain before they get to you, and what does the rest of their journey looks like after you. Like
Right.
shortly after, and even if you really wanted to go full 360, like
Hmm.
throughout their whole journey, because a lot of our ICP is obviously companies that are scaling up. They're Series B, maybe Series A. So what are the pain points they're going to feel as they're scaling up with us? We want to make sure that we unblock that, right? Because then that means that they're going to thrive and grow faster, which means they come back around to us to help them again to continue to grow. But we're also, unblocking them basically to get there faster.
Right. Right. I have an interesting question. It's a little bit long, but I think I can give it to us in summary here. Basically, if you're a small startup and you're dealing with larger partners, there can be a lot of red tape in dealing with things legally. This could be a technical issue. Do you have any general advice you can share on this front for our listeners?
Yes, and I'm experiencing it right now. I think what you have to look at is, for that partner profile, I call it this shiny object. Of course, it's great when you can partner with a big company, from a co-branding perspective. It lifts the perceived quality if you're a smaller company. But one of the things that I'm discovering now is there's a lot of opportunity, similar to when you're looking at the businesses that you're going to cater to, right? Whether there's SMBs, middle market, or enterprise. It's the same in the partner world. So in this market, what I would be looking for is somebody maybe in Inc.'s like 5,000 fastest growing, because they're going to be equally as passionate as you are to serve their customers, but they're not quite as big as a $1 billion corporation where their programs are now so scaled up and dialed in and so automated that they're even though they do create the platform where you can self-serve, they're not as open, some of them, to doing this. And to his point, a lot can get lost in just all the red tape. So while you're nurturing those, especially if there's a huge business case that you're
Hmm.
solving a pain point for that bigger, because there's always a pain point you can even solve when they're that big, you can still nurture that. That's a longer term relationship play. But I would look for
Yeah.
some partner profiles that are in the middle that are equally as excited and passionate about growing. I would
Yeah.
balance it out.
Yeah, and one of the other questions Justin mentioned here is that, like, even something like sharing leads between companies, that can be an issue. If you're, what I'm hearing you say, Tanya, is if you're a little more peer to peer, or maybe just a little bit closer on the scale, maybe it's not such a big issue. Bigger companies, they consider that almost like their IP, and it can be a problem. Would you agree? Are there some workarounds on that? Tell us more.
There's some workarounds now, because there's because now this is going to be the decade of partnership. So now there's technology that's coming in to fill some of those gaps. When it comes to lead sharing, you can have agreements put in place, and a lot of big companies will have you sign some level of an NDA. But there's now these account mapping tools. Back in the old school day, you had to like say, hey, I have Gary, John, and whatever company, and do it all manually and try
Yeah.
to account map, between companies. Now you have like these tools like Crossbeam and Reveal that automate all that, right? They have integration into Salesforce and HubSpot, and then you sign this agreement within your partners, and you have like a security measures to say how much information you're willing to share. But by doing that, you can see, oh, we have overlapping prospects or overlapping accounts, or you have accounts that we have potential, prospects that we'd love intro. So now you can get more strategic about not only lead sharing, but also, someone brought up integrations, which we even talk about today, which is another powerful way to create a partner ecosystem. It even helps to like reveal who you should be doing integrations with in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Dennis asks an interesting question as well, kind of segueing away from that. What's the best way to do what you were talking about before? Obviously, you've come up with one solution. You shared it with us, the whole partner channel, or that solution that you came up with. But what are some other ways to leverage partners while offering that give first, that whole ethos thing that you were talking about there? How do we do that? Give us a little bit more insight, if you would.
The leveraging them for our clients, or leveraging them within the partner ecosystem. I do a lot of partner matchmaking. So because I've taken the time to learn where my partner's goals, where their goals are, what are some of their pain points, etc. Whenever I
Yeah.
partners in, if I feel like they could be a strategic match I'm automatically doing partner matchmaking. And that's probably where they get the most excited. I've had partners say that whenever they see an email from me, they go into it. And then we're going to start doing like partner connection and huddles so that they can start meeting each other, because they all want to meet each other. So I think that's one way of leveraging partners within the ecosystem. As far as, I think that's what he's asking. I'm not sure, actually.
Well, I think you might also be just getting at like business to business. Like, how can we actually offer them value, and then maybe make certain that that's maybe fully reciprocal. I think Dennis may be hinting at that. Dennis, you can tell me in the comments if I'm on track or not. But I think that can be a challenge. Like it may be like to get over the threshold of saying, hey, you'd be a great partner. Let's offer this great thing to you. But then to go the rest of the way where that circle actually closes again. Now we also have. Give us some tips on that, maybe, because I think I could see it hanging up there. I could see it. Yeah, I'll be on your thing, right? I'll be on your approved partner channel, whatever you want to call that. But that's a different story from really avidly doing business together, business to business. I think Dennis may get into that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's where those early wins are important, right? To keep them engaged. So that's any co-branding, mini motion you can do with them, any webinars. Again, they see the most value in the partner connections, because that can bring them revenue. And it has actually, in the case of us, we've had partners where I connected them where either they're creating motions together or they're creating revenue together.
Yeah.
Or revenue has come from that exchange. So it's similar to using, what you'd be using in business with referrals. It's just taking that concentrating within the ecosystem.
Yeah, maybe just stick with it and deepen it enough, and then that trust grows, and the doors should open from there. Maybe that's all it takes, is just not expecting it to be like, maybe what we can do is maybe forget, hey, this is not meant to be transactional. Like it's not like old school quid pro quo. We're trying to build an actual relationship here, and sometimes it takes a little time deepening that trust. And maybe at that point, things can blossom into a real full partnership where, hey, not only are we together offering value to the marketplace, but hey, we can really serve each other as well. I don't know if I'm off track on that. What are your thoughts?
No, you're not. And that's a trend that a lot of people are talking about right now, which is the co-selling motions. And not anyone just wants to jump into a co-selling motion, right? Because you have to get teams involved with that. Everyone has to be educated up on both sides. Both partners have to be equally committed, or there's going to be an imbalance there. But you can't get to that point until you take the steps of building trust. If you come straight out and say, I want to do a co-selling motion with you, that's not. And I've seen it with partners. They're like, that's why I phase it in. Here's phase one. Here's some early wins. Here's my vow to you. I'll do everything possible to keep your business in mind as I'm talking to other partners, or within, even our own client base. And then it just continues to grow from there. And we have a case now where we're going to be doing a mini, it is like a mini co-selling motion where she's about to start educating her team and putting us into their sales cycle. This just happened within the last week.
That's great. That's great. Well, and Dennis did validate that he's interested in doing more business with some of these partners. I mean, if you're a marketing company, you could use Overpass SDRs all day long, right? It's a perfect fit. And so I think, to what you're saying there, Tanyette, it's going to take some time. And I'm remembering what you said earlier in our conversation today that, hey, there's a cultural shift happening here, maybe even internally. Maybe we're only just now buying into this whole give first, treat it organically, more like an actual relationship, give it time. Well, that doesn't mean the other company has gone through that same evolution. It may take some time for them to kind of see what we're doing, really buy in fully. Like I see it maybe as layers, right? Like the initial elements of a shared ethos are, this deep. It takes a little longer to see just how deep these things go and just how much alignment there really is. And in time, it should happen, it seems like to me, if we continue with this. But you said this also in the conversation today. This is still fairly new, so I guess we're kind of discovering this together, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. And I mean, most channels don't start seeing revenue until 12 months. I mean, we're ahead of roadmap, but the sustainability and the compounding effect comes from like month 12 to 18. And to Dennis's point, yes, absolutely. If marketing agencies have a huge pain point that you can solve, right? That becomes another motion that you test out into the world. But before you go there, you have to take those first 5 to 6 months to be able to get on foundation so you can support that. Maybe it's an agency motion, which we're working on as well, to his point.
Well, Tanyette, what a fantastic guest you've been. I'm not surprised. I already knew you, but I'm so glad to share you with our audience. And you've really helped us today get some really great actionable advice to our listeners. So thanks again for being our guest today, Tanyette.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to all of you for attending and being a part of our fantastic and ever-growing audience. Tell your friends, bring them back. We're here at the same time, same station next week. We'll see you then. Signing off. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.